Hi everyone, today's topic is internal controls, and I have chosen a March-June 2019 question, and it relates to deficiencies in sales, purchases and inventory, and payroll. And as you can see in here, for 18 marks, the examiner is asking for 6 deficiencies. Now, 1 mark, 0.5 for identify, 0.5 for explain, 1 mark for recommend control, and 1 mark for test that recommendation. So 0.5, 0.5, 1, and 1. So if you divide 18 by 3, you would need to come up with 6 deficiencies in internal controls. In an exam question, it can be asked internal controls relating to anything, or it can be asked just relating to payroll or purchases or sales. But in this question, it was asked all through them. So let's go through the question and identify the deficiencies there are in internal control. The company is a listed company, and it has an internal audit department, which is a good thing. And you are audit supervisor, and you've met the finance director of the audit client to plan the audit. So you need to identify 6 deficiencies in internal control, and the first one is relating to sales. So if we read this paragraph in here, it says that the company generates revenue through visits by its sales staff to customer premises. So the sales staff are going to the customer and taking orders. Sales ledger clerks who work at head office carried out credit checks on the new customers prior to being accepted and then set their credit limits. This is a deficiency because a simple sales person cannot just set the limit credits. This should be made by a more senior person, a manager or a supervisor, but definitely not a person who works in the sales department who enters the figures in the system. So as a deficiency, you should say that this should be set up by a manager or a more senior person as a recommendation. And as a test of control, you always test that recommendation that you're given. So you should say that for a sample of the new customer entered in the system in the last few months, confirm that it was sales manager who agreed on the credit limits and not the salesperson. So you've identified the first deficiency. So if we move on, and so the sales staff visit the retail customer sites personally, and orders are completed using a 4-part pre-printed order form. It's good that is a 4-part, because if in question, if you see a 2-part or a 3-part, there's a deficiency there. Now, each sales order number is based on a salesperson own identification number. Again, this is a deficiency. They should be numbered in sequence. If one is lost, then you realize that an order is missing. But if you don't have these piece of papers numbered in a sequence, that you won't be able to identify which one is missing or whether or not one is missing. So this is a deficiency. As a recommendation, you should say that this should be numbered for a sample of the order taken in the last few months. Ensure that these are numbered and are numbered in sequence, and you can put this down as a test of control. Now let's see what the examiner says in here, because you should always explain. So if you look here, candidates are required to explain the implication to the business to be awarded credit. If you say that the pages, the orders are not numbered, you've identified the weakness, but you're not explaining the consequences. So this is what the examiner says: orders taken are not numbered, and this could lead to a loss of orders, to loss of revenue, to loss of customer goodwill. So you also give the implication in order to get the 0.5. So identify and explain. So if you look here, the question says identify and explain. So you identified the weakness in the system, but in order to get another 0.5 for explanation, you have to give a full explanation why is a deficiency. So just remember that. Now if we move on to the question here, it says that the retail customer are given payment terms of 30 days, and most customers choose to pay their invoices by bank transfer. Each day, Lily, a finance clerk, posts the bank transfer receipts from the bank system to the cash book and updates the sales ledger. On a monthly basis, she performs the bank reconciliation. So normally this is weakness because accounts person, she's recording the receipts that she gets from the bank statements into the accounting system, and then at the end of the month she's reconciling the bank. So you should say why is a deficiency. So you should say that it should be a segregation of duties, because if she does a mistake when she's recording the receipts, she might be unwilling to at the end of the month to highlight that mistake. So mistakes might go undiscovered, or even fraud. So as a recommendation, you should say that there should be two different persons who performs the recording of the sales receipts and who performs the bank reconciliation. It might be that the accounts staff are not sufficient, but then if she records the receipts, then a more senior person or even the financial controller should double check the bank reconciliation and details. So as a test of control, you should say, for example, of the bank reconciliation performed in the last few months, you should confirm that the bank reconciliation was signed off by a different person than the finance person, her name is Lily. As long as you know these from past papers, and as long as you practice, that won't be that difficult. Now, if we move on to the purchases, it explains how the invoices are matched to the goods received note by the purchase staff who works in the accounts department. And then it says in here, when they enter, once they're authorized, the purchase invoices are lodged into the purchase ledger by Camila, who utilizes document count control to ensure the correct number of invoices have been input. Supplier invoices that she enters into the system by way of numbering, by way of how many documents have been entered. So if she has 10 invoices on her desk, she says that I have 10 invoices here, I've entered 10 in the system. But this does not mean that the values, that the amounts are correct. So this is a deficiency, and you should say that it might lead the purchases being under or overstated if the amounts are not correct. As a recommendation, you should say that the person should use a batch control system, meaning that when she enters the invoices into the system, it gives you the total number of invoices, that you can compare the value that it was given for 10 invoices in the system with the value that you have physically on the invoices. So you calculate that with your calculator, the total of the invoices, and then you look at the account system at the screen, and you see that the total is the same. So this is an internal control in place to ensure that the values are correct. And also you can number the invoices from 1 to 100 or 1,000, wherever, just to make sure you'll be able to identify the invoices quickly, and also that you have not missed one. So this is a recommendation. A test of control, you can say that for a sample of invoices, supplier invoices that you have in there, you can try to enter them in the system to ensure that the system does not enter less than 10 invoices or less than 5, or does not allow to enter invoices without a batch system being used, and also that they are numbered. So this is a test of control. If we move on to the payroll, it says that the company has a mixture of factory staff who work on a standard shift of 8 hours a day, and administration and sales staff who are on the salary. All staff are paid monthly by bank transfer. Occasionally, overtime is required of factory staff. When this occurs, details of the overtime worked per employee is collated and submitted to the payroll department by a production clerk. So the payroll department pays the overtime in the month it occurs. At the end of each quarter, the company payroll department sends overtime reports which detail the amount of overtime worked to the production director for review. So if you read this paragraph in here, you can immediately realize that there's something is wrong. You cannot just pay an overtime on a monthly basis, and then after 3 months, a quarter, you would ask the production manager if that overtime was all right, because it's too late. So if you identify the deficiency and you explain the deficiency, this might lead to overtime being paid to people who are not supposed to be paid in the first time, or paid more or less. And there is a recommendation. You should say that the sheets of the overtime should be sent to the production manager on a weekly basis, and he or she would sign off the sheets and then send to the payroll for payment. As a test of control, you should say that for example of the payroll of the overtime paid during the last few months, you should ensure that this was signed off by production manager, and then those hours were paid. So this is a deficiency. All right, so if we move on, you'll see that the payroll package produces a list of payments per employee, which links into the bank system to produce a list of automatic bank transfer payments. The finance director reviews the total to be paid on the list of automatic payments and compares this with the total payroll amount to be paid for the month for the payroll records. So what does it do is it looks at the payroll batch that goes through the bank and compares that with the payroll records. But it might be that these are different with the 1 or 2 or 3 cents, and the finance director might say that everything is okay, is just a small slight difference, but in reality it might be that people are paid less or more, or different people are paid than those who are supposed to be paid, or even fraud might be happening. So what you should say that, for example, of a few employees, 2-3 employees, the finance director should ensure that the amount paid through the bank is exactly the amount that is on the wages records. So this is the recommendation. As a test of control, you should say that for a sample of employees paid during the month, like 3, 4, 5, you should confirm that the finance director signature is on the payroll sheet, and that it was checked before payment. So that was payroll. I think we've come up with 5 so far, and should come up with another one. And if we look at this, the company values its inventory using a standard cost, but both internal management reporting and both for internal management reporting and for inclusion in the year-end financial statements. The basis of the standard cost was reviewed approximately 18 months ago. The company uses a standard cost, but these are reviewed 18 months ago, which is quite a while. And you should say, so this is a deficiency, you should say that the standard cost should review more often, otherwise the valuation of the inventory is wrong and could over or undervalued of inventory. And you should say that the standard cost should review more often as a recommendation. And as a test of control, you should say that you should discuss this production manager. Also, you should ensure that the standard cost was updated during the last few months. If you practice enough the past questions, the deficiencies, like everything else, and the audit and assurance are more or less repetitive. So you'll more than likely get a deficiency which is either in sales, purchases, or payroll, because these are often asked in the exam.